Soul of Darkness is an action platformer that's clearly inspired by the Castlevania series, and even though it would be incredibly easy to just write it off as a shameless clone, it's actually got a good few things going for it. As the player, you jump into the shoes of Kale, whose family was slaughtered by vampires, and he vows to track and hunt down each and every one of them responsible. And you'll find yourself jumping and hacking through level after level, taking on enemies with your trusty staff and using magic to help you navigate the tricky environment. While the adventure is pretty linear when compared to Castlevania, there is still plenty of secrets to be found, which are often hidden in hard to reach areas where you'll have to get creative in order to reach them. But what really sets the game apart from similar experiences though is the upgrade system that relies upon purple shards that can be found throughout each level. Once you've collected enough, you're free to spend them on one of many different attributes, such as the weapon's combo power or magic capability that all have a use throughout the game. The main one is the way you can actually use your staff to help you get around, by impaling it into walls and using it as a handy platform to reach higher ledges, or using it to create platforms of ice to help you jump gaps that would otherwise be impossible. Upon reaching the end of each level, you'll encounter a boss, and this is where your knowledge of all the mechanics in play will be truly tested, and they easily become one of the most enjoyable aspects of the game. If you've played the Castlevania titles on the DS and are looking for something quite similar, then Souls of Darkness is just the ticket. The DS wasn't exactly known for its abundance of first-person shooters, but with the likes of Metroid Prime Hunters and Brothers in Arms more than proving that the genre was viable on the handheld, it didn't take long for other games to begin to pop up. One of these was Core, which is by far one of the best examples on the console, and sees you jumping into the role of Jason Crane as he investigates an underground facility that houses a meteorite which crashed into the Earth 20 years prior to the mission. Upon arriving, it's clear that something is being let loose, with all of the scientists and security squads being mutated husks of their former selves, so it's up to Crane to get to the bottom of what happened. Gameplay is intuitively handled with the stylus and allows you to quickly respond in a firefight with great accuracy, and with a generous selection of weapons from pistols to shotguns and more exotic options that I won't spoil, the minute-to-minute gunplay soon becomes a real highlight. Now, one aspect of the game that at first seemed like a huge oversight is that during your search of the facility, there's no map that accompanies your exploration, but as you get further into the game, it takes on the characteristics of a horror title due to this limitation, and forces you to memorize certain paths, and of course, not knowing what any given area may have in store really ramps up the tension as you proceed. Further enhancing this are the visuals that present a dark and somber environment that is scarcely lit and plays into the atmospheric nature of the facility perfectly. In the end, if you're looking for a solid FPS to try out on the console, Core is a great option. For anyone who's ever played the likes of Azure Dreams or Shiren the Wanderer, Izuna will feel instantly familiar, with it sharing the same setup that sees the game revolving around a hub area that you leave and spend a decent amount of time going into dungeons to level up, get some items, and head back into town to sell materials, store the ones you want to keep, and then stock up on healing items before heading back in. And thanks to the often quirky and humorous characters you meet along the way, it also manages to convey a pretty solid story. But its main attraction by far is the gameplay and the wealth of different items, weapons, and types of armor you can acquire, which all affect your proficiency within the world. Through the use of special objects known as talismans, it's also possible to conjure up magic and use it to your advantage, which can be attached to certain weapons as an upgrade, and also provide various performance boosts that help flip the outcome of enemy encounters. Early on, however, you'll find yourself retreating and picking your battles carefully, as it is so easy to find yourself at a game over should you rush in and get overwhelmed by the enemy's attacks. This constant feeling of progression is what really helps Izuna excel, with the only downfall being that the game is just over too damn soon. But thanks to the overwhelming torrent of weapons and armor for the player to acquire, there's always a reason to jump back in. Despite the shortcomings, the dialogue is hilarious, the combat is engrossing and rewarding, and overall it becomes a game that's just incredibly hard to put down. The first thing that puzzled me about fighting fantasy on the DS was the absolute abundance of negative reviews that accompanied its release. Browsing a few of them, you'd be forgiven for thinking that this was an absolute abomination of a game, but when I actually dived into it for myself, I have no idea what the pro reviewers at the time were smoking. This is easily one of the most enjoyable first-person dungeon crawlers that the system ever received. It's very much an old-school setup that sees you filling the boots of an adventurer who's on the hunt for the treasure of a powerful warlock, and you must explore the depths of several maze-like dungeons and slay the hideous beasts that reside within them. The game puts a huge emphasis on puzzles as well that make exploring each environment all the more challenging, but it really comes into its own during combat, which sees you getting to use a wide range of different weapons and skills that can be earned as you progress. The skill system is without a doubt one of the best inclusions, and sees you over time getting to increase their potency as well as your attributes such as strength, stamina and luck that all come into play throughout many of the situations you'll find yourself in, allowing you to shape your fighter in a way that matches your approach to the game. May that be up close and personal or fighting from a distance with ranged attacks, the system in place has got you covered and makes subsequent playthroughs where you can focus on different types of builds all the more enjoyable. Even though it was panned when it first released, Fighting Fantasy is one of the best hidden gems you can find on the DS, so if you're fond of this style of RPG, it's definitely worth giving a go. Mech Assault is a series I've always been interested in ever since being introduced to it on the original Xbox. What I didn't know, however, was that it received a spin-off on the DS, which ended up being a highly ambitious project that could have gone one of two ways, the first being a stripped-down and somewhat unrecognizable experience, or the developers actually pulling off the impossible by capturing the essence of the original, and thankfully the latter is true. The story sees humanity having spread throughout space, with rising nations vying for power throughout the cosmos by utilizing mech warriors. These are huge hulking machines, and throughout the game you get to use a nice variety of them as you can hack into any mech you may come across on the battlefield, which all have their own properties, such as different weapons and armor sets, each with their own inherent advantages and limitations. Some machines are small and incredibly agile, others are huge and slow, and some are all about dishing out absurd amounts of damage. One thing to get out of the way is just how technically impressive this game is when taking into consideration the hardware that it's running on. The individual mechs are extremely detailed. You can see the legs move and grind with every step, they'll smoke and spark when damaged, things explode with impressive force, and all of the vehicles are generally well animated, which lends each and every fight a truly visceral quality that will draw you into the action and keep you on your toes. If you ever played the original game or even any of the Armored Core titles, Mech Assault Phantom War provides a great alternative on the handheld that deserves a place in your library as well. The DS was no stranger to unique experiences, and this was mainly due to the stylus setup that allowed for all different kinds of games to flourish on the system. One of these was Time Hollow, which is essentially an interactive visual novel that throws you into a huge mystery, with the player taking on the role of Ethan, a young man whose parents have been missing for years. After finding a strange pen that seemingly gives him the power to open up rifts in time and change events, he decides to use it to get to the bottom of what happened to his family. Now, a game of this nature either lives or dies on its story, and thankfully Time Hollow more than delivers in this department, with its somewhat simple beginning soon opening up to a far more engrossing adventure that focuses on the virtues of friendship, and more importantly, how the passage of time affects those bonds. It isn't an adventure game where you solve puzzles or anything of the kind, but rather a game of investigation. These usually come in the form of flashbacks that are represented by photos in your journal, and once you come across one within the world, you've got to open up a hole in time with your pen, meaning you'll have to draw a circle with the stylus at the right spot and choose an action to perform in the hole in order to modify the past, and bit by bit more of the mystery will unravel. I'm not gonna lie though, this game won't be for everyone. The somewhat slow and methodical nature of the experience will likely see some players tune out, and of course if the story doesn't interest you, then it's not that much in terms of gameplay. On the other hand, if you're at all fond of visual novels, then this is easily one of the best available on the DS. Shuffle Dungeon has to be one of the most interesting games that ever hit the DS. That's all built around a simple concept, which delivers some of the most enjoyable gameplay that you can find on the system. Much like its name suggests, the concept sees you entering dungeons which are constantly changing, and every couple of minutes of play sees either the top or bottom screen shuffling through different states. Should you get caught up in the shuffle, you're forced to start the stage over again. It basically sees you having to move up and down between the screens while solving puzzles, flipping switches and opening chests so you can find the stairs located on each level and move lower into the dungeons. If that alone wasn't enough to worry about, the game also throws enemies into the mix, but thanks to a well thought out battling system that's comprised of different weapons and armor sets that can be acquired throughout the course of the game, from swords to spears, axes and daggers, which all offer up different types of attacks, you'll be pulling off critical hits in no time, all the while getting support from one of the game's greatest inclusions, and that's something known as Fupongs. These are weird, round little creatures that all bring something different to the table. Red Fupongs spit fire, blue ones form a shield around you, yellow ones fire a lightning attack at on-screen enemies, and the green one heals you. As you can imagine, this adds a lot of depth to the gameplay, and the fact that they can be fused together and leveled up to create even more formidable allies is a system that's just as rewarding as it is enjoyable to use in combat. Shuffle Dragon is a really fun game, and a refreshing one at that, so if you can find it, it would make a great addition to any DS owner's collection. The first Legend of Cage released way back in 1985 in the arcades and would become one of the classics from that era that was mostly forgotten until Taito brought the series to the DS with a full-blown sequel. Of course, it built upon the gameplay of the original but threw in many new ideas that helped develop the formula into what is one of the handheld's most enjoyable action platformers. You get to choose from one of two characters and are tasked with rescuing the daughter of a shogun who's been kidnapped by a demonic warlord. Like most games of its kind, it's all presented in a series of levels that see you taking on wave after wave of enemies as you slowly progress to the end of each stage. What makes it so much fun to play though is that both characters are pretty nimble and come along with the ability to climb vertical cliffs, hang from ceilings and block enemy attacks with their sword. But when the time comes for going on the offensive, they are just as capable in that department as well. Here is where the skill system comes into play, such as being able to conjure up deadly duplicates of yourself which fight alongside you, to launching powerful elemental attacks and summoning monsters to do your bidding. The action is fast and moves along at a brisk pace, so taking advantage of all of these options is essential to reaching the end, and this is no more apparent than when it comes to the boss encounters that verge on the spectacular at points, with some incredible designs and tricky attack patterns that demand the player has a full grasp of all of their capabilities. Overall, Legend of Cage 2 is a perfect game to pick up and play in short bursts, and thanks to the serious amount of depth in its gameplay, it's something that will constantly deliver. The Tales series has long been one of my go-tos when it comes to action RPGs, and The Tempest is unfortunately one game we never got here in the West, but it's now fully playable thanks to a fan translation. If you're at all familiar with the franchise, then you'll know exactly what to expect when jumping in, as you're presented with a huge adventure that deals with two warring factions, the first being humans and the second the remnants of an ancient civilization of half-beasts. After the kingdom is plunged into chaos, it's up to a group of 5 friends to return peace to the land. Now in terms of gameplay, everything will feel instantly familiar, with most of the dungeons being simple enough to explore, with multiple paths that lead you to where you need to go, or straight to a treasure chest that contains an item. When you're not exploring the world or checking out one of the many cozy locations throughout the game, battles take center stage, which all plays out in real time, with the game operating on the tried and tested linear motion battle system. Here you've got 3 different planes for your characters to switch between, with each of them possessing a wealth of basic attacks and special techniques that give you a real fighting chance. The combat controls work reasonably well, and although they take a bit of time to get to grips with, once it all clicks you'll be equipped to tackle anything the game throws your way. Building on this are the beast transformations that a couple of your characters are capable of pulling off. In this mode you hit fast and do tons of damage at the cost of the TP meter, and once estranged you'll return to your normal state. All in all, it's not exactly the best Tales game out there, but for fans of the series and action RPGs in general, it's definitely worth checking out. Blood of Bahamut is yet another game that never made its way outside of Japan, but is now fully playable thanks to a translation, and when I came across it, it was a huge surprise, as it's a game that seems to take inspiration from the likes of Shadow of the Colossus and blends it with the many RPG elements that veterans will be accustomed to. The narrative tells the legend of a god who gave birth to gigantic behemoths and covered the earth in an unrelenting mist that slowly robbed humans of their life force. As a result, the remnants of humanity made it their goal to battle and defeat the larger-than-life monstrosities that now roam the world freely, and this is where the journey begins. The entire adventure is split up into a selection of missions that give you one of several different objectives to complete. These usually entail heading to a specific point on the map, surviving for a set time, or defeating the behemoth entirely, and this is where the battle system comes into full swing. Almost haunting the background of each location is one of these monsters that will constantly try to attack you or swinging at you with its weapon, and in the meantime the ground is filled with lesser enemies that pose a more immediate threat, and juggling between the two is what really helps the combat come alive. Thankfully, your character has special abilities that can be unlocked and upgraded by using materials that you find throughout each stage, as well as a basic melee or ranged attack for when those skills are on a cooldown. After spending quite a while playing it, Blood of Bahamut has easily become one of my favourite games on the DS, so if you fancy something a bit different from the norm, this is a game you do not want to skip. Well, that does it for another video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new videos. You can follow me on all of the socials, which are linked below, to stay up to date, and also join my growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with and to take part in giveaways. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters: Rhino, Skilljim, Shuden, Richard, Daniel, Dio, Omar, Strider, Pierre, Carl, Awesome Jacket Dude, Maximus, Scott, Alfred, Terry, Ryan, Alex, GameCube Galaxy, Curse Salaryman, Fake, and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find all of these links down below. As always, thanks for taking the time to check the video out. I'll catch you next time.